All right, I'm just gonna wait another minute for everyone to join. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming to our webinar today. The Junior Economic Club is honored to have Student Uprise with us here today. But for those of you that are not JEC members or are tuning in through YouTube, the Junior Economic Club was founded in 2014 and is an entirely student-run nonprofit that fosters a community of driven high school students and business leaders. JEC offers students exposure to business and economic concepts that aren't taught in school, and the club has over 100 students representing 25 high schools across Chicago, as well as chapters in 9 cities across 4 countries. You can learn more about the club and admissions at junioreconomicclub.org/home. But now we would like to introduce our guest speakers. And Stephen, could you start us off?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here. My name is Stephen Lee, as some of you may know. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I attended Walter Payton College Prep, recently graduated, and will be a rising freshman at Stanford University studying management science and engineering.
Sebastian?
So I guess I'm next. Hi guys, my name is Sebastian Duque. I'm from Miami, Florida. I recently graduated from John A. Ferguson Senior High School here in Miami, Florida. And I'm going to be attending Yale University in the fall, majoring in environmental studies, possibly with a double major in poli-sci or international relations.
Hey guys, my name is Santiago Alviad. I'm from El Monte, California. I graduated from South El Monte High School. The city is in the outskirts of East Los Angeles, California. I am a rising freshman at Stanford University, and I plan to major in engineering physics, specializing in quantum science and energy alternatives.
Hi guys, my name is Narvella Seifa. I'm from Montgomery, Illinois. I'm a recent graduate of Yorkville High School, and I will be attending the University of Chicago in the fall, and I'm going to be studying global studies on the pre-medical track.
Diana?
I think Diana might be having some internet issues, but I can introduce Diana for her. Diana Salas is also from Chicago, Illinois. She graduated from the same high school I did, Walter Payton College Prep, and she's also a rising freshman at University of Pennsylvania, majoring in international relations and economics.
Fantastic, thank you guys. So you guys are or have written a book called Succeeding in the College Application Journey. Stephen, do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So throughout the summer, specifically this summer, our panelists here today have decided to partake in a project called Succeeding in the College Application Journey. We decided to make a college guidebook that discusses every single aspect, every single step of the college application process, from essay writing, peer editing, all the way to scholarship applications. And we wanted to, while helping out current rising seniors who will be applying this year, we wanted to integrate our personal backgrounds to make the college application process seem less robotic and more human. All of the panelists here today come from first generation, low income, immigrant or people of color backgrounds. And we wanted to really embrace the fact that these type of backgrounds can enter competitive high financial aid schools. And we decided to publish a book about that. The book is officially available on Kickstarter and Amazon. We launched on Kickstarter around 6 days ago and reached our goal of $200 within, I think it was like 2 hours. And then we are currently even at over $1,000 in sales. You guys can definitely check out our Instagram at Succeeding College Apps for any additional information, and feel free to reach out to any of us. But we have a few more questions just to kind of discuss the journey and the creation of the book.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask you guys a little bit more about your entrepreneurship experience. If you guys could each give us a little bit of insight for each question, that would be great. But the first one is, what is your prior experience with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so just a preface also, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But regarding this project, I started this project and had all of these panelists work with me just because my experience in creating new projects that are not limited to the academic classroom. So I hate doing projects that had like a rubric to it, just following the rules essentially. I wanted to create things that were actually in the real world. So with that, my experience with it has been a lot of creating different clubs at high schools. I've created a few websites, e-commerce websites, to sell different products to just make additional revenue. That was my first experience, where I just made a website, some items on there, and resold as a profit. So that was my very first experience. From there, it went to different Kickstarter projects that
I think Steven might have accidentally gotten booted or something. So I'll kind of take a stab and kind of answer this question from my own perspective. I didn't really have any experience with entrepreneurship at all, really. The most I had done was I participated in MIT Launch in my sophomore year, which was like this project that MIT had where they were like getting high school students involved in entrepreneurship by having them kind of like create a project or like a product. But besides that, I had never really done anything like this. So this process was definitely something that was very new to me. But I think Steven is back now and he can kind of talk more on it. He was really like our guiding light, and I've learned a lot from him. And Steve, to answer your question, it depends. There are some colleges that will consider you first generation if your parents attended college in another country, but there are some colleges that will consider it as if you're not first generation. So it's kind of like a case-by-case basis. It also depends on like what profession your parents like carry in this country. Like if your parents are able to do the work that they studied in their country of origin here, then you know you kind of have that. It's not the same as if your parents studied in college in another country, but then they come here and they're working in another job.
Sorry, yeah, my call dropped. But what were we? We can probably move on to the next question.
Okay, great. So why did you guys decide to write a college application guidebook?
Yeah. So a lot of the panelists today can also add on to this, but primarily our goal was to help the rising seniors this year with applying. We know that COVID-19 took away a lot of in-person resources that were extremely valuable to us when we were applying. So for example, college fly-in programs are no longer in person. A lot of college access programs are no longer offering in-person activities, relying on online access, which can be extremely difficult. A lot of schools, public high schools, are going entirely remote. Now a lot of students aren't going to have access to those counselors, to the teachers, to just workshops even to help with the application process. All of those resources are removed this year. I know Chicago Public Schools, they just released an entirely remote plan. So it's just, you know, you coming from a first generation low income background, it was already really difficult to apply. So now adding the stress of COVID-19 and its implications is definitely something that we wanted to alleviate, because we had the privilege of just having a smoother senior year when applying, and we wanted to make a all-in-one stop that had every single step of the application process, every single thing that you could possibly need in one book. And that's how we kind of started it. We also wanted to embrace our different backgrounds. Like I said before, we all come from very, I would say, unconventional backgrounds that you wouldn't see in the stereotypical movies of people getting into really selective institutions. We come from backgrounds that our parents are immigrants or people of color, low income, first generation. And a lot of those stories aren't really told. So throughout the entire book, on top of the kind of analysis of each application step, we integrated our individual testimonies, our stories of our experiences with certain things, and just making the experience seem like it's not robotic. You know, you can make mistakes, you can show your identity, you can show that you're human. And that's how we just went with the book. Any of our panelists can also jump in on that too.
Yeah, I would just say that like obviously being given this opportunity to like write this book like was just something like really amazing, because when you're applying to college, like yes, there's so many things that people are telling you, but like sometimes like the information that's being given to students is so overwhelming, and like sometimes it's hard to understand which way to go, like what to do. And I think that in the book we've tried our hardest to just make sure that like everything's concrete, everything's concise, and we've been like thorough, because when you're applying to college, a lot of things are kind of obsolete, they're in the air, you're not really sure exactly what you should do. And coming from a first gen background, it can be hard because you're not sure who to turn to ask your questions. And obviously with COVID-19, like that just makes everything so much more hard. So I think for me, like choosing to be a part of this program was trying to be someone that I could have used when I was applying to college, be like providing a resource for students who come from backgrounds similar to mine or similar to any of the other panelists, to have a resource that they could know for sure that they could turn to when they had questions.
Yeah, I think it's also like the little things like filling out the FAFSA application and the CSS application. Like when no one in your family has gone to college before, like it's something that's completely new to you. And like, you know, like your classmates around you will be like, oh yeah, like my mom just filled it out for me. But then like my mom doesn't even speak English, so I had to fill it out entirely by myself. So just little things like that. It's like we wanted to help people that are going through a similar experience by literally going over even the little things like the FAFSA application, the CSS profile, even the financial aid letters. Like, you know, when you get them, you're like, what are indirect costs? What are direct costs? Just all those little things that people who have had people that go to college in their families already know, so that people from similar backgrounds could learn them as well.
I also want to quickly add before we move on from this question, when you look at any college guide app or college guide resources on the market today, or even for free, none of them are by students. Not all of them are by adults that typically come from very different backgrounds, oftentimes white or high income, or their parents have gone to college before. A lot of these resources, they come from assumptions that are just not applicable to a lot of these different stories or different variety of backgrounds that a lot of our students come from. In addition, none of them are student written. You know, there's a lot of things that are coming from the student perspective that, in my opinion, made the book really resourceful and insightful in a different way than what a counselor might tell you. Because counselors can typically just refer to a rubric, or they have some sort of data to qualify you for. So coming from a very student and just kind of like a genuine, honest perspective was something that we wanted to put new on the market, as there was not one to begin with.
Fantastic. We can move on to the next question. So how do you gain credibility as youth, and how did you get funding for your book?
Yeah. So this is definitely the question, because it is hard to be starting your own business or organization as someone that's not even an adult yet. That's always definitely hard to just gain your ground in the industry or gain just credibility from someone, especially when you're applying for funding. So for us, specifically for this book, we had a lot of different editors and peer edits from each other. The book, would have probably lost credibility if, for example, I was the only one who wrote it. I come from one perspective. I come from one background. So one of the main credibility we have is that it's written by 5 total authors, all from completely different, diverse backgrounds, and they're all contributing to each other. We divvied it up by section, but yet we continuously read over each other's like sections. We read about what they say, and it's a combination of knowledge of all 5 of us versus just one. In addition, we did like quality checks by having rising seniors actually go through our content and edit it, making sure that it was effective and made sense. Like we had a lot of different things that were in our control that we could possibly use as benefits to make our book seem more credible. And then lastly, we even had a high school counselor go through our content just to make sure it was purely accurate, but not remove any of the student voice from it. So those 3 main factors contributed to our credibility in being an actual effective college guidebook. We also put a lot of prefaces in between the book discussing like we all come from student perspectives. This is not an official like college board book. We talk about how all of our knowledge comes from different resources like counselors, fly-in programs, admission counselors, those kind of things. In terms of funding was a very kind of lucky situation. We originally started the book we didn't intend for funding at all. We intended it just to be running based on revenue to give back. Our goal was to have all of the revenue we make be used to contribute to offset any costs to manufacture free copies. Our goal is to continue distributing free copies to college access programs and high schools that don't have the funding for it, just to make sure this resource is accessible. But the way funding came to us was that my college access program, in addition to my internship, both were kind of, with COVID-19, they wanted a lot more students to be in charge of creating their own COVID-19 initiatives. And for me, I was already working on this college access initiative that's directly linked to COVID-19. So we ended up applying and discussing like exactly what costs we need, what's our goal. We really honed in on the fact that we were running as a nonprofit without the legal status, how we were really trying to use all of our revenue to distribute free copies. So just being really specific in terms of like what costs you need, exactly what mission you're going for, what progress you made. I know for the grant I applied for, I also had to describe my credentials, so my like leadership skills, and that can vary. I discussed my leadership skills in clubs, my organization skills from like clubs I started, different projects I was working on at the exact same time. So that helped build my credibility in gaining funding. And yeah, that's kind of how we're currently at now. There are several different grants that are specifically targeted toward youth. If you go Google some sort of like social initiative grant or entrepreneur grant specifically for youth, there are like 500 up to thousands of dollars in funding available specifically for ages like 13 to 17. So sometimes being part of a youth is not a disadvantage. It actually helps you be eligible for different grants available. So definitely look into that.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
To add on to kind of just a little what Stephen was saying about credibility, another way that we worked to like gain credibility was by having other organizations kind of like endorse our work, like, shout us out. When people see organizations like College Point, like the College Point advisors shouting us out, then they know we're like a legit source, if that makes sense. You're more inclined to buy or to look into something when you have bigger organizations backing them up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and adding on to that, like College Point, it was kind of like endorsement because we were able to give them free copies and they were able to go read through it, see if they enjoyed the book. And it was just a lot of word of mouth marketing that if this one person says that I enjoyed this book, then it just adds on to the brand of the overall book and like the quality of it. And that just continues on even beyond like professional organizations, even our friends, our peers, people that are similar to you that come from backgrounds like you, like our junior or our rising senior editors, like they come from very similar perspectives as our target market. So them saying that they enjoyed the book genuinely is also building onto that credibility.
Great. So I guess we can move on to the next question. So why Kickstarter or crowdfunding? I mean, I know a lot of us don't know what Kickstarter or crowdfunding is. So if you could explain that a little too, that would be great.
Definitely. So Kickstarter is a platform, a crowdfunding platform, which means you can promote or launch any new idea you have. So we did a publication Kickstarter where we showcase our book, exactly what was going to be in the book, why we're doing it, our missions. You're able to discuss all of these factors, and you're able to set a goal and launch date. The goal is the amount of money you need to reach to officially like launch the product and make a product. So a lot of goals on Kickstarter can reach up to like $10,000. A lot of tech products go on there to start off, where it's like, this is a tech blueprint. We want to create this and we want your help. If you believe in this mission, you believe in this project, then help us fund it by pre-ordering the product, which will add toward the goal. And then once you reach that goal you set yourself, within that time frame you also set yourself, then you have the Kickstarter will pay the funds to you and you're able to go with production of the product. If you don't reach the goal within that time frame, then you all the money gets refunded back to the original buyers. So it's kind of like no risk in terms of for the buyer, but it also helps like the organizers or the product makers to have some financial backing before officially starting. For us, we specifically, once again, we intended for zero funding initially. We just got lucky with the grant, but we continue on with Kickstarter because the book wasn't just a book. We wanted to show our mission. We wanted to show our table of contents. We wanted to show our stories. So Kickstarter had the perfect platform for that because it let us really showcase all of that. Baha will send you guys a link to our Kickstarter, or you can search it up now too. If you just search up Succeeding in College Apps on Kickstarter right now, it'll be up. But we have a lot of information on there that has helped us gain credibility, showcase our product assets, and has definitely helped grow our brand in general. And we've got pre-orders through there too to continue selling. So it's kind of like an all-in-one spot that we enjoy. You guys also might have heard Indiegogo. That's also a crowdfunding site. You don't necessarily need to start through these organizations to necessarily like start a business, but it definitely does help your mind when you do have some like financial backing behind you in terms of your product.
All right, thank you so much. So now we are going to move on to the college questions. I know these might be a little bit different for each of you, so if each of the panelists could just say a little bit about their experience for each of these questions, that would be great. So for the first one, what were some of your most difficult challenges in the college application process?
So I'll just start it off real quick. For me, definitely, as also goes into why I even wrote the college book in the first place, is just not knowing what to do step by step. I come from a first-generation low-income background where my parents did not speak English, so the entire process was by myself. So that was the main difficulty, just not knowing exactly like, what do I do in this section? What should I write in this section? What do I do next? What's the chronological order? When should I apply for scholarships? All of that was just extremely difficult for me to figure out, on top of the stress of just writing essays, figuring out time management, doing classes. So just having all of that go in order was a difficult process. Luckily, I had mentors to help me through it, but that was just definitely challenging for me.
I think like Steven, mine was the same problem. My community sort of offers college access programs, but for me, I guess they were sort of, to like get straight to the point, like I was rejected by these college access programs, and it was mainly because like they saw my test scores and they saw my grades and they saw like all the things that I would do in high school, and they realized that I don't need the help to apply to college, even though my parents are illiterate, even in Spanish, and I'm a first gen low income student. So that was really irritating. More than irritating, I was actually kind of furious at like my community for like obviously disregarding a certain population in its like city. So like I know a lot of people have access to like these college access programs, and I'm telling you right now to like take advantage of them, because even the smallest of the problems that you may have, they can help you. Upward Bound, Avid, and like other like cool programs that I'm not aware of. But that was the most difficult part, because a lot of problems that I faced, or like a lot of, I guess, second thoughts that I had, could have easily been solved by like reaching out to a mentor or having like a specific program that I had. I could have just like asked them, hey, what's this? And they would have answered like quickly, but I had to like self-advocate for my own So I had to like, I don't know, it was a lot of like rough processes, and it could have easily been, I guess, overcame if I had this book with me. So yeah.
I would honestly add on to what they said. I think one of the most difficult things for me was finding out about things like too late. Like I actually didn't know about fly-in programs until practically all of them were due. So I didn't get to do any of them. And like that sucks because especially now when I hear from like Steven and like Santi, like how much fun they were and how good of an opportunity they were, I'm like, damn, like I would have really liked to have done that. So I think that's definitely one challenge that I faced a lot. Like I would find out about things too late. Things like LEDA and other summer programs, I found about them too late and I didn't get to participate in them. So I think that's one thing that I would say was definitely really difficult for me. Um, I'd also just say kind of what I mentioned before, like not like, you know, not knowing anything about the college application process beforehand. So like writing essays was like something that was like completely new to me. And like I didn't have like, you know, family members that had written essays. Like I had to rely completely on like my friends and my teachers for like any sort of advice on that. And yeah.
Yeah, I'd say for me, the biggest thing that I struggled with was time management, not in the sense of like being able to finish things on time, but it's just like when you're applying to college, there's so many things happening at once. Not only do you have your schoolwork to be completed, but like you also have the strict deadlines that you can't like just extend or anything like that. Like the college deadlines are hard and like set. So I think it was just mostly making sure I got in everything on time as well as like managing my schoolwork and things like that. I also applied through the Questbridge College Match, which no one from my school has ever matched through Questbridge before. So it was definitely a struggle because none of my teachers knew what it was. I only had one counselor who knew what it was. So it was definitely like a hard process because I had to figure out everything by myself. But other than that, like I think what I really learned from the college application process was just making sure I write down everything that needs to get done and just like making sure I hold myself to strict timelines because those will definitely help you when you're applying.
As for me, the hardest thing was definitely trying to figure out what I wanted to write about and how I wanted to frame my application, because there was several things that I could write about or several ways that I could present myself to admissions officers, to trying to figure out what was most authentic to me and how I wanted the admissions officers to see me and accept me for who I was and what I thought I could bring to the table. That was definitely the hardest part. And then to go along with that, finding the colleges that would be the right fit for me. It's really easy to get caught up in the name game and just trying to apply to based on rankings and stuff, but try to find the schools that would be right for me, like in terms of fit and environment. I thought that was really difficult and trying to come to terms with that. But by the end, I was really satisfied with everything that I had done. But the process of getting there was really difficult.
Great, thank you. So what were some mistakes that you made during the college application process?
So for me, I definitely made a lot of mistakes for financial aid. That was just a struggle for me because I didn't know which tax forms I needed. I didn't know exactly what number goes there, like what assets go there. Like it was definitely just a hard time just figuring out exactly what to do with financial aid, just because there's so many very specific things that you usually go to your parent for, which I couldn't do. So I definitely had issues with my tax forms from my colleges. Some of them had emailed me back saying this form was done wrong or you need to resubmit this. It ended up being fine. They're usually very flexible in terms of that, but that was definitely something I wish I just had some sort of better resource to help me go through that entire thing.
Yeah, it's really funny that you mentioned financial aid things because I actually yesterday I was like going through my Yale portal, whatever, having some fun, looking at how much money they're gonna give me, whatnot. And I look at the requirements for financial aid and it says that they still don't have confirmed if I'm a citizen or not. and that I can't get my bank until they confirm it. And I'm like, wait a minute. So like, you know, it's like little things like these that you can make like the tiniest little mistakes while filling out the CSS, FAFSA, and it can be things that you're not even aware of. Another mistake I would say is something that we touch upon in the book is like listening to people who edit your essays a little too much, to the point where you can like lose your voice and like it starts sounding like other people are writing your application instead of you. Those are two mistakes I can think of off the top of my head. But really, actually, I have like an anecdote. This didn't happen to me, but to somebody else, kind of to touch upon what Steven said, that they're pretty flexible because they understand it's like the first time we do this for a lot of us. One of my friends actually submitted his Cornell supplemental questions late because he didn't realize it was a separate submission. Like, you know, normally you have to submit like your actual Common App, and then you have to submit your supplemental questions too. So it's like you have to click the submit button twice, and he only clicked it for his Common App. And Cornell was actually really like flexible with the whole situation, but it just goes to say that there's a lot of little mistakes that you can make, but for the most part, they'll be pretty nice about it.
I also want to really quickly jump in about Sebastian mentioning how he had too many edits about his essay. I also did that. For my personal statement, I think I had like 20 people read it in total. I had like every single teacher I knew read it. I had my peers read it, my mentors from my college access program. I had so many people read it. And the feedback I got was extremely difficult to just deal with, because a lot of these people who edit your essays don't come from your background. They don't know who you are. I had one that really stuck out to me was when my teacher told me to remove my language element from my personal essay. And that was definitely so hard for me, because my personal statement was about my identity, and language was such a big part of it. And for her to just abruptly say, like, completely remove it, that was definitely something really hard for me to deal with, because it's like, do I remove it for a rubric agenda, or should I keep it for my individual, like what I want agenda kind of feel? And so that was just something I feel like I could have probably avoided, wasted less time on, and just really kept my voice to what I really am. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I'm like a huge procrastinator, but like who isn't? But like in my case, I really lagged it on like a lot of my applications, specifically scholarships. Even though I'm good now, it's like a lot of the opportunities that I didn't realize I had, or a lot of the opportunities that are especially for STEM students in FGLI experiences, they were, I guess they just passed by me because I wasn't aware of them. And like later on, I start to realize that a lot of scholarships and a lot of opportunities could have been open to me specifically, because if I just had like my like stuff together, I guess. So yeah, that's basically one of the biggest mistakes that I've done. But like I can see, like going back to Sebastian and Steven, how like a lot of external influences can kind of like trap you into like making a mistake of like mistaking, I guess, your personality for the sake of like having everything fit in a box, I guess. So I mean, there was one experience that I particularly didn't have the mistake of doing, but that I know could have happened. So like when we were editing one of our books, I had like one of the counselors made a comment about like my identity and stuff like that. So she actually said that I made a bad move about like marking American Indian. And like as context, my family is American Indian. We are from like the indigenous people of Southern Mexico. But there's a lot of like, I guess she realized her mistake in assuming that I can't be American Indian because I honestly don't know why. But basically, if I were to listen to her and if she were to tell me that recommendation like a couple like months before the deadline, then I would have marked, I guess, white, and I would really be uncomfortable with that, or even like anything else other than white. So yeah, like just um, listen to other people's like recommendations, but don't be forced to like listen to them, I guess, and like enforce their ideals onto your application.
As for me, I would definitely say that leaving my SAT testing really late. That was a big mistake for me because throughout my junior year, I was like, I'm just gonna focus on it during the summer, like it'll be okay. But then, the August test came around, and I actually, even after continuous hours of studying, I actually ended up dropping in my SAT score, and then I was freaking out. It was like, oh, I was already in school. It was like such a rough time because now I have to study for the SAT more and in a different way because obviously the way I had studied before didn't work. So now I have to study for that, plus work on my applications, plus I had my schoolwork and my extracurriculars to focus on. So that was like a added stress that I wish I couldn't have had because it affected my academics in a way that probably could have been avoided if I had put just a little bit more time throughout my junior year. But I guess I was too caught up in my academics junior year to try to add time to it. But I think that if I had just implemented a few hours here and there throughout the school year earlier on, I wouldn't have had that extra crunch at the beginning of my senior year. And that was something I wish I had been aware of and had, not been so confident about and had been more wary about beforehand so that I could have had more leisure and be less stressed around when I actually had to focus on my applications.
Narvella, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I'll just piggyback off of Diana because that reminded me. I did take my ACTs during the summer of right after junior year, but I would say that I wish I would have. So what I did was like I studied for like 2 weeks intensively, then I took the test, and I was expecting like, oh, my first shot, like that's gonna be fine. I was like, I don't understand why everyone's studying for this for so long. But after that, I realized like obviously like I didn't do terribly, but it just wasn't like my best, and I knew I could do better. So I wish I would have just, so then I had to take it again basically to get the score that I wanted. So I wish I would have just, instead of trying to rush it, just studied for more time and then taken it just once versus taking it twice and studying for less. So I think that was just my mistake that I made.
So I know you guys talked about applying to a lot of different schools, but a lot of these schools that we're going to apply to are going to be extremely competitive. So what do you guys think that we can do to set ourselves apart from other applicants?
Yeah, so that's definitely a difficult question to answer, because it's we're not admission counselors, but one thing that I thought I did was well, I wrote about a very, I guess, common theme. I wrote about immigration. I wrote about Chinese American identity and in my personal statement, and that can be a very common topic, right? But the way I feel like that helped me distinguish myself was the specific, extremely specific details that I included in my personal statement, because everyone can have an immigrant story, but your immigrant story is going to be extremely different from everyone else's. I talked about my dialect and how no one else spoke it, talked about the very extracurriculars that I was involved with that helped me embrace my identity. And that a lot of my like academic interests were just very kind of unique and weird in my opinion. So I did a lot of like environmental and business combination situations, and I was just generally who I was. Those were the passions I was extremely part of. That's just been kind of like my entire journey up to this point, always balancing between these two different passions. So I kind of oftentimes I would just embrace the very specific details that were part of my life, embrace the side, and just really go in on the extremely specific details. My themes, and as I said before, I'm very confident that it was my details and those very specific memories that I brought up that helped me just make it my immigrant story versus someone else's, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I would.
Oh no, you go ahead, Narvella.
Okay. I was just going to say, I 100% agree with what Steven said. And I think that's something that was like the most influential thing I learned in the college application process was that you need to be genuine when you're writing your applications. Like you need to show the academic officers like who you are, because they're going to be reading hundreds of thousands of applications. And if yours is just the cookie cutter application, that's not going to set you apart from anyone. I think that in my applications, I went beyond my good grades, because I think that when you're applying to top tier universities, so to speak, like everyone is kind of like the cookie cutter student, like perfect GPA, good grades, good test scores, whatever. And even if you don't fall in those categories, like that shouldn't stop you from anything. But I think that what I really spoke to was my extracurriculars. Like I was highly involved in my school throughout high school, and I think that my extracurriculars and activities that I was involved in really shaped who I am. So I think that when I just really spoke to those and spoke to my identity and kind of didn't hide anything, like I made sure that the person who they were seeing on paper was the same person that I actually am in person. And I think that that's what set me apart from other applicants.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with both Stephen and Narvella. Like it's really about those details. I think one thing that I struggled with as well was like, you know, people telling me like, oh, like that story was like basic, like, you know, but I think it's all about how you make it your own. And it's in the little details that you get that. So like, for example, for my Harvard essay, I wrote about my my culture, right? Which is like, anyone can like write about their culture. So like some might say like, oh, like that's a basic prompt to like go to. But I wrote about like Santa, and like how Santa was really weird for me because I came from a country where we called Santa something else. So I was like, who's Santa? So like that was like the premise of like my essay. And like my admissions officer, like when I met him via like Zoom one day, he was like, oh, like your essay really stood out to me, because like I'd never like thought about that. And he was also from like a Latin speaking from a Latinx country. So he was like, I'd never like looked at it that way. So it's really in like the details that you can get yourself to stand out. And yeah, just be yourself and really show those passions that you have. My two like passions that I was really inclined towards were like theater and science. So like you really want to get those passions across, because they do help set you aside from other applicants if you can really demonstrate a passion in the topics that you're putting in your application.
Yeah, and in like some cases, you can use your passions to your advantage in order to like create this like cohesive story that you have in your common application process. So like I guess in my situation, I took advantage of like several I guess several like supplemental essays that weren't asking specifically why I was doing a specific extracurricular, but that explained why I chose to do the activities that I wanted to do. So I guess I Harvard and Stan. I actually off like I applied to Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. Only those three, but like each of them has like their own special way of like asking you why is X activity important to you and how did you start, or like what makes you interested in that. But like more than that, I added like more essays about like why I was interested in like plants and botany, and why I was interested in like the STEM fields and like the theoretical fields in like general. But like looking more at the logistics, I knew going into like freshman year, I wanted to show commitment into like all my activities. So I joined all my activities like at the beginning, and I like after that, I knew that that was going to be like my main goal of, I guess, developing those programs and clubs for the majority of my high school career. So all the activities that I had in my common application process were for 4+ years, to show that like I didn't join these clubs in like junior year or like sophomore year is still valid, but like junior year or senior year, just because I knew that I needed to add like an extracurricular activity to my common application process. And like that being said, you shouldn't add an extracurricular activity to your common application unless it means a lot to you, and unless like I guess you could speak to it, because a lot of times people would be more inclined to like list a bunch of extracurricular activities, and then colleges see that, but they notice that you only put like 1 hour a week per the activity, or like even less than that. So that wouldn't be like much use of you. So I guess like prioritize activities that speak to your passions and to your image as an applicant, and stick to those, I guess. Yeah.
As for me, I would say that agreeing with everybody else, trying to frame your application in a way that sets you apart is looking for something very specific to you. While I also, like a few of my peers also wrote about an immigration story, but I chose to use a metaphor to explain it, the experience, and how my development as a person throughout the years, and what I've come to now, the realizations I've made because of these experiences that I've had. But also, I would say that to in a specific school, there will I think you should apply to a school only if you are there's a specific reason as to why you want to go there. um, I think it's really easy for an admissions officer to just see that you're applying just because you want to like get a shot into, let's say, a top tier college. You just want to apply as many of those as you can. I think it's really easy when you make a typical like, oh, you guys offer a lot of research opportunities, you guys have a lot of clubs and blah blah blah, that applies to so many colleges. A lot of these top tier colleges have a lot of funding, a lot of resources, a lot of research opportunities, and very cool classes and professors to help you out. So writing about these things isn't really going to set you apart, but there will always, I think every college has something that can can call you in. For example, I applied ED to Penn, and what called me to apply ED was this program that they had. It's called Get You at Penn, which is a program that teaches the indigenous language of the Andes. And many people applying to Penn did not know about it because it's not something that Penn necessarily advertises or talks about. It's not something that's in the front line of what they advertise as their school. But it is something, just a few students participate in it. But I thought that because of who I was and what I was writing about in my common application, I was able to tie those two things in together. And I think it was really easy for the admissions officers to make the connection as to why who I am as a person would fit right in at Penn, specifically with this program that they had to offer, and how that would help me not only grow my cultural experience, but also let me grow academically, and how I would be able to add to that school. And something I would also say is, when you're applying to these colleges, these colleges know that they're amazing, that they have their, of course, a lot of people are applying to them, but so they're trying to see whether or not you'd be a fit for their school. They're trying to see what you can add to their campus, and not just what they can do for you, because at the end of the day, they're admitting you instead of another person. So you have to make it quite obvious as to why you are worth them giving you a spot at their school, and how you would utilize that spot not only for yourself and to enhance your own experience, but to help other people on campus and make changes in your community or the world because of the experiences that you make in this college. So I think just trying to make connections between who you are, what the college has to offer, specific niches that a college may offer. I would say, just search something up that's very specific to you and that you are really passionate about. It doesn't have to be super like extraordinary. It doesn't have to be like being like a researcher or something, but something that really speaks to you. And if a school can, answer that calling in a specific way, talk about that, and not only will that help you stand out, but it'll also help you find a school that is right for you.
Great. So on that topic of finding the right school for you, how did you decide what college was the best fit for you guys?
I'll answer. Oh, but before I answer, I wanted to like answer Steve's question on like um, if participating in what about in involvement in nonprofits, and if that's valuable. So like colleges know when you play up the name of your like program or whatever, because like everyone does. So like a lot of people like, and a lot of students too, like it's not a big deal. They say that like they started this nonprofit organization and that they've like had this much in revenue, which is awesome. But like the title of like having a nonprofit and then in the activity itself isn't really what like sets you apart from everyone else. It's participating in an activity that actually has a profound impact. So like you could have a nonprofit like title, but like what colleges want to see is, I guess, results and how passionate you are and how involved you are in that activity. So like you can't really take, you can't, or colleges can't really like value a specific activity over another based on the name. It's more on like what you describe in the description of the Common App or everything or anything else. So I hope that answers your question. If not, someone else can answer it better. But how can you decide which college is best fit for you? So I guess I applied to 3 colleges and I got accepted to like Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, which is a really cool like option to have. Originally, I was really lenient on MIT, and later on after I got accepted to Harvard, it was like honestly the name, and a lot of you guys are gonna have this problem because you guys are really smart, but like you guys are going to be like leaning towards universities that have that name brand, and that's what like sort of like influenced me to like consider Harvard in the first place. But in reality, like the people that have like the universities that have this name brand, especially Harvard, um, that's all that they have for them, except the like the big endowment and stuff. So like when you're trying to decide what's the best fit for you, is looking at the resources that are like specifically for you and how like how possible or like the plausibility of seeing yourself in that university and having like a great time. So like one of the biggest turnoffs that I had with both of the schools was like that the first gen low income like support wasn't as strong as it was in Stanford's. Like I remember asking a like an economic question and a financial question to like a Harvard representative, a Harvard FGLI representative, and they didn't answer until like a couple months later when I made my decision. And she even admitted to say that like the Harvard FGLI support isn't as strong as it is in other schools, even with their historic, I guess, reputation. So that was like one of the biggest turnoffs. Um, yeah, and so I guess like there was another question talking about how like when should you consider like a name brand university or like versus a liberal arts like private university that doesn't really have the name. I've had a lot of friends that have chosen like Amherst and like I guess Swarthmore over like big university names like Princeton and like Yale and stuff like that. So honestly, like when you're trying to compare universities, just look at like what resources that it has for you and like the majors and stuff like that, and try not to let the brand name sort of influence you, because at the end of the day it's just the brand name that's like kind of sexy, I guess. Like nothing else is appealing for you. So yeah.
So I'll answer next, and I'll start by answering Courtney's question. I applied to 23 colleges, and I would not recommend you apply to that many unless you have fee waivers. If you have fee waivers, I am an advocate for using them to their fullest and applying to all 20 schools that the Common App will allow you to apply to. But if that's not for you, you don't have to do that either. I think a good number is kind of what Diana said, around 8 to 12. You definitely do want to give yourself room to have some matches and some safeties. If anyone wants us to, I guess I'll kind of explain that a little. Matches are like the schools that you're in the range for. Safeties are the schools that you're like above the range for. And then reaches are the schools that you're either below the range for or just so competitive that even if you match like their SAT scores and like all of their like requirements, like it's still really hard to get in. So I'd definitely say it depends how many you should apply to. If you have a fee waiver, definitely use them to your advantage. My thinking when I was applying was like, if I apply to 23 of them, I'm bound to get into one. So yeah, definitely use fee waivers to your advantage, but try to get in at least 8 through 12 so you can accommodate some matches and some safeties. As to how did I decide what college was best for me, I was in a similar dilemma as Santi. I got into Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and initially my dream school was actually Columbia, and Columbia rejected me. But I was actually I'm really happy with how everything turned out. So I think that goes to speak with, don't bank everything on your dream school. Things will be okay. But on top of that, how did I decide between the three of them? I think I pretty quickly kind of saw the same thing that Santi saw. Like, I felt a lot more comfortable with the Yale community, and the Yale FGLI support felt better, as well as like the queer community and the Latinx community at Yale just felt more lively to me. I really like the residential college system, and I know Harvard has like a similar system kind of with like the houses, but it also felt like in a way it was kind of at least this was my impression. And I think that's one thing with like deciding what college is best for you. It's really personal, and it's something that you're at the end of the day going to end up going kind of like with your gut. At least that's what I did. Like, I just went with my gut because I was like, you know, college is a time to enjoy your life. Like, you're going to have grad school to really like dedicate yourself to your studies. Like, in grad school you're not going to be partying and stuff, but in college you are. So you want to go somewhere that you want to, like, you're going to have fun and whatnot. And I think when I chose, I saw that Yale was somewhere that I would be comfortable and somewhere that I would have fun. And Harvard and Princeton weren't at that same level for me personally.
So
For me,
I'm gonna.
sorry, Stephen. Go ahead, Stephen.
Do y'all hear something? Narvella, maybe you want to answer. I think maybe.
Yeah, I might just go ahead, and then when Stephen gets back, he can answer. For me, I had a very like unconventional application like process. Like, I did the Questbridge College match, so I never really got to like pick what school. Like, it was kind of picked for me. But when you do the college match, you get to rank up to 12 schools. And basically, how I knew a college was the best fit for me, or like which colleges I chose to rank out of the 42 partners, I chose to rank 8 of them. And they had to have the major I was looking into. I answered this kind of in the chat. For after going to a fly-in, like, I loved the school so much, but it was just they didn't have what I wanted to study. And after the fly-in, I realized like what I want to study is like the most important factor to me. Like, no matter what college like it is, like they had to have what I was interested in. So I made sure that they had what I wanted to major in. And then I also looked into resources that they had for students of color, students from background like myself. I just wanted to make sure that on campus I would find my community. So those were like the two things that I really looked into. And then I ranked 8 schools, and I got matched to the University of Chicago. And I think that I got really lucky, and I matched to somewhere that I think is a really good fit for me. But just make sure that if you do choose to do the Questbridge national match, like, don't match anything just for name or just because, but because if you're matched there, you have to go. So it's not really worth it to match to a school that you don't feel like you'd fit at.
I'm also going to jump in. I know someone asked about holistic review. And that's really important because, like, if you look at the current circumstance, a lot of schools are removing SAT scores. And this is just like my taste on it, but it's entirely on holistic review because SAT score is one of the things that is so income, background, and just, I guess, like privilege, because there's multiple studies on how income level is literally correlated with SAT score or SAT score, and that's just going to be based on your availability to private tutoring resources, your parents' knowledge, even like going to be very dependent. So what holistic reviews does is that takes into account about your background, and then takes that into consideration when evaluating your testing performance, your academic.
Oh, we keep losing Steven.
Even. But I think now that like I wanted to say something that's Bastion said in the chat about like following the money. And like that's a really good like you should really go to a university that offers like generous financial aid, and even then like consider your circumstances, because I know Harvard and MIT offered like a full ride scholarship too, but they were only giving me like $400 to for travel expenses, and I living in like the West Coast, I guess a round trip with like economic class and not like carrying any luggage on me would be like $800 usually, because I went to New York City a couple years ago and that was the price range. And so I petitioned to have it like I guess like have it increased or something like that. And they denied me because they said that that was the max amount of money that they're willing to give me, and if I wanted more money for like travel expenses, then I would need to like cut down on like I guess my personal expenses, which was kind of dumb. And later on, when I saw that Stanford was giving me the same amount of money and I was living on the same coast, that's when I realized that like you know what, Stanford is the place for me. Um, so like when not only like when you're looking at I guess in a sense, Harvard had the better financial aid package because they were forcing me to pay less of a student contribution. But in the long run, Stanford was being like far more generous because of my certain circumstances. My personal expenses would be a lot more if I attended Harvard. So I guess that's why it was more generous in their case. So yeah, just look at your individual circumstances and how it's gonna affect your financial, I guess, your financial and economic stance in the long run, and realize how that plays an important role when deciding what college you want for yourself.
As for me, I decided that how, as I said, I am an ED applicant and I did get an ED. So the way I decided what college was best for me was, as I said, I talked about that specific program that I liked about Penn. But not only that, I because that just one program alone shouldn't be the only reason you should apply to a school. You should like different aspects of a school as well, like look for the community that they have, the support systems, the people that go, like the vibe of the school, how the students generally behave, because some schools are known to have like quirky students or whatnot. So definitely look into the student body, I say, was really important because, as I said, most schools have a lot of resources that they can give you, but the student body really changes from school to school. So I was definitely wanted to make sure that I was at a school that I could be comfortable in. For example, something about Penn that might be a little controversial. Some people might, and some people might not like this. The pre-professional culture there, I thought was something that would really entice me to become the best version of myself. While I think it can be a little toxic at times, I do think it's also for like the best. I think that the people that go here really want to push themselves to the absolute their absolute limit. And I really wanted a school that would push me to somewhere I've never been before and give me an opportunity to do so. Um, I just found that the student body was also really interesting. I thought that they advocated for very important things. And for example, they had this thing called Casa Latina, which is a support system for Latinx students on campus. And they have a lot of meetings every single week. It's a community that they have. They do things across the city to help the Latinx community throughout Philadelphia. And I just was also looking, I would say also when looking for a school, look at financial aid. But as a piece of advice, actually, when I was looking at a lot of schools that I was in between quite a few schools, and how I decided to ED instead of REA somewhere else. For example, I was thinking of doing REA to Princeton. How I made that distinction um, was first, I outweighed financial aid and the opportunities and the programs that I would be able to be a part of. For example, Penn to me was more expensive than Princeton, but it was something that it was a risk I was willing to make because I thought that the benefits and I guess the specific program really did outweigh so much because it was the only program in the country that was like that. So it was something that it was a cost that I was willing to take in order to fulfill um, this need to learn more about this specific thing that I wanted to learn about and be a part of. Um, but I would definitely say maybe don't do that because let's say I ended up being really lucky in that Penn gave me a lot more financial aid than I expected than it said on the net price calculator. But maybe looking back, maybe that was not the best decision to make because it was a really significant, it was like, Penn was like 3 times the amount that maybe other schools were. So I would say maybe don't be like me and don't take such of a financial risk when making a decision because sometimes if I had gotten unlucky, I would have to have taken out student loans from, and net price calculator, they give you 3 ranges. And if I had been at the upper range of the net price calculator for Penn, I would have had to go into student debt. So I would say, especially when you're making things like an ED decision, definitely be more aware of financial circumstances. But if you're applying regular decision, that's not, of course, it's something you should consider, but it's not something that is super important. But I would definitely say maybe don't be such a risk taker like me. I mean, it worked out for me, but in case that it wouldn't, it would have been kind of tragic. So I would say definitely play more on the safer side, especially in the early rounds of admission, but definitely look for different aspects like diversity, support system, resources, programs, and the professors and the things that they have to, and the majors that they offer and how for example, how the general requirements are met and what their curriculum is like.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. So I know you've given us a lot of great advice, but if you had one piece of advice for current high schoolers, what would that be?
I guess I'd just say get started now rather than later. I think you guys especially find yourselves in a really unique, to put it in a nice way, in a really unique year. And I think there's definitely going to have to be a lot of planning ahead because, say for example, like last year, there were definitely moments where I needed like a last minute transcript. And, for me, it was as easy as just going to going to the office and being like, yo, I need a transcript. But like, if you aren't at school, like you might need to order those transcripts much farther ahead of time or just things like that. So I think planning ahead this year is definitely going to be a really big thing because you find yourselves in very unique and different circumstances, and counselors also find themselves in really unique and different circumstances. And I guess it's going to depend on each person, but some counselors might even be better online than they usually were when they were in person, but some might be a lot worse. So I definitely just try to plan ahead of time so nothing catches you by surprise, because I think things catching you by surprise now during this time might be a lot worse than when they catch you like on a quick deadline when you're in school.
I guess for my advice is when you're writing your essays and like creating your college application profile, um, stay true to who you are, I guess. Like be authentic and genuine, because a lot of times if you're trying to force yourself to be like funny in in a college essay and you're really not, college admissions officers are going to know that you're sort of like forcing yourself to be funny because you're not naturally like that. So just take your qualities as like, I guess, a person, and see which ones are like your best qualities, like if it's your humor or your optimism. And be sure to emphasize that in your college application process and in your essays to sort of like create this image of authenticity that colleges really want. Yeah.
I think my piece of advice would be don't sell yourself short. A lot of my peers that I know, like I know they could have, if they wanted to, they could have gotten into um, top tier schools as well. And I think that they just sold themselves short because oftentimes, like people are afraid to apply to huge brand name schools because they don't think that they could get in or they don't think that they fit the molds. But I think that if you put yourself out there, oftentimes you'll find that maybe you actually were good enough or you were the right student for that school. So don't sell yourself short and don't like limit yourself from opportunities just because you're afraid that you wouldn't make it or you're afraid you won't get in.
I
Go ahead,
oh
Diane.
I would definitely say, for example, something I would advise is to definitely stay true to yourself, and also kind of what Narvella was going, don't sell yourself short because or specifically this, don't compare yourself to other people, your other peers in your school. I feel like I got really caught up in the competition per se. Like I word goes around about who's applying to what schools and during which timeline. So I ended up getting into this really toxic mindset of trying to compare my odds against other people that were also applying ED to Penn. And I think that that's really toxic because you have no reason to compare yourself. You don't really know their story. You don't know what they wrote, how they did in their application. So trying to compare yourself based on small facts that like their maybe their test score or their grades or maybe what things they're involved in. It's like you shouldn't care what another person has done or what they did or who they are. Just focus on yourself because the comparison game, it really gets you nowhere, and more so it kind of wastes your own energy. So just make sure that you're doing the best that you can and focus on yourself and just don't worry about anybody else. And it's honestly best that you just don't even really know who's applying, because it honestly, I just don't think it's like the best thing to get caught up in those, like I would say, conversations. So, and when decision time comes around, I guess don't be super pressuring to people. It's a difficult time. So definitely be sensitive to rejection, be sensitive also to being accepting that you have accomplished things, but also having to accept a rejection or maybe wait lists. So definitely just be sensible with other applicants and even with the decisions you receive yourself.
Narvella, do you have anything to say about like test optionals? I know UChicago is like test optional usually. So like
Yeah, UChicago is test optional. Personally, I did not apply test optional, but I know a lot of my peers who are incoming freshmen did apply test optional. And I think that UChicago, like when they say it doesn't matter if you're test optional or not, like I think that they're being genuine. If you have a good test score that you want to showcase to the school or you want them to know, like that's just another piece of your application. And I don't think that your test scores outweigh anything else. And if you choose to be test optional, the school's not questioning like, oh, why didn't they submit their test? Like, what don't they want us to see? I think that they're being very like genuine when they say it doesn't matter to them. So I think that if you have a good test score that you want to showcase to the school, go for it. But if you are a little weary about submitting your test scores, it's completely fine if you do choose to do test optional. And I know that not all schools do test optional, but if that is something you are looking into, make sure that you research to make sure that the university you're applying to is test optional.
Great. Thank you guys so much. That's definitely great advice for us. But we do have some time for a couple audience questions. So if you guys could raise your hand in Zoom and I will call on you guys. Trinity, go ahead.
Hi. So I know that when you're asking for letters of rec, usually you'll ask a teacher who has taught you within the past 2 years. But because of the current pandemic, obviously some of the teachers that we're going to have in like senior year maybe won't know us well enough. Even some teachers in junior year, specifically for CPS students, we weren't really able to build a good rapport with them because of the strike and because of quarantine. So would you say it would be all right to ask like any teacher, even from your underclassmen years in high school, for a letter of rec? Like what would be your recommendation for that or your advice?
Absolutely. I would say steer away from freshman year if you can, but I think sophomore year is perfectly fine. Both of my teachers that I had for my recommendations were actually from my sophomore year. I did technically have one of them as well for senior year. So one of them I had for sophomore year for AP chemistry. And then the other one I had sophomore and senior year for AP English and then IB English. I think really just look for teachers that you do have a strong connection with. And if you haven't been able to build a strong connection because of the strikes or because of school shutting down because of Corona, definitely don't go for those teachers. Stick to the ones that you know you have a strong relationship with, and especially ones that can attest to how you are outside of school, which is, I think, why it is so hard for these teachers from your senior year and junior year to do that, because they're only going to be seeing you like over video for maybe like 1 hour a day. So I think definitely, especially this year, schools will be really understanding with students choosing teachers from their earlier years, probably.
Yeah, and in the case that you really don't have anyone else to turn to, like I know my I guess my high school isn't really that big, so we really don't have like a choice to find someone that's actually meaningful to you. I'd advise to like take the proactive approach and email them and say like, you know what, I really want you to write the letter of recommendation because it's a really good class and it speaks to my major, but we really don't have that connection. And I'm willing to have to create this connection in order to have like a good letter of recommendation. And you can do this by saying like, I would like to have like a Zoom meeting with you talking about like my experiences as like a high school student and the struggles that I individually had to go with and the accomplishments that I've made. So I guess like I wrote this in the book too, to like sort of like for everyone else too, but it's basically like if a teacher doesn't really know you outside of the classroom and you really want them to like write about you, ask them for like a part of their time during like school and stuff, so you can talk about yourself and you could sort of like develop this relationship. Because although like a lot of the meaningful relationships that you get with teachers throughout high school is like organically, it's made organically, you have the opportunity to like, and you have the right to, because they're your teacher, I guess, but like you could reach out to them and say like, hey, you know, like I want you to know more about me so I could like guarantee that you could write a good letter of recommendation for myself. So like just know that that's always an option if you don't really have any other options for yourself, and just like be proactive and self-advocate for your, I guess, your like your college application process. So like ensure that your letter of recs are going to be like the best possible like quality it can be.
And I would just say, like, a good rule of thumb when you're asking teachers for recommendations is make sure you ask them, would you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? If it's not strong, it's not good enough. So when you're asking teachers, like, if they're even a little bit weary about like answering that question, you can either, like Santi said, like try and build more of a connection with them. Or if you don't trust that they would be able to write you a strong letter of recommendation, maybe it's a better option to just choose another teacher if you have the opportunity to, because these teacher recommendations are giving academic advisors and officers like an inside look of how you are, not only as a student but like as a person. So if your teacher isn't able to speak to those values about you, then they're not the person to ask.
Yeah, my Harvard AO was literally my admissions officer. One of the things that he pointed out was that like my recommendation letters were really strong, and that really like made like, you know, made him like me. So they're definitely something that's really important. And I think another thing that I would say is ask around, in your school, like what teachers are good for letters of recommendation, because like there are some teachers that will be infamous for being bad. Like there were, you might be like, wow, this person would make like a great but if they don't turn them in on time, or like, so definitely ask around. There will be teachers that will also be famous for being amazing recommenders, and both of the teachers that I chose, on top of having a strong relationship with them, previous applicants to other competitive universities had gotten recommendations from them as well, and said that they wrote really good recommendations. So that's why I chose them ultimately.
Great. We have time for one more question, or I think we can fit in two. Cole, would you like to go?
Yes, hi. I had a question about early action and early decision. So I know, Diana, you got in through early decision, and I was just wondering how different that process is when applying, and um, for if any of you all applied through early action, how is that process as well?
So I'll answer that question first. I actually applied early decision to Penn and early action to UVA. I was able to do that because it's a public school. Because it is the public school, you can apply EA to any public school that you want to. So it was really a different experience, I would say, because first of all, you have to make sure that everything is turned in way early. You have to make sure you contact your teachers for letters of rec, for example, very early on, maybe the first week or two of school. Make sure that your counselor is on your rec as well. Your counselor recs maybe not be as important because admissions officers understand that your counselor isn't really going to know you the same way your teacher does, but they still have to write it. So making that decision as well is something you should probably do during the summer. I would say that if you are applying to EA or ED somewhere, it is something that you should kind of look into right now. Try to make that decision once you start school is not really a good idea, because once you start school, you'll have to, really start grinding on your essays, get them reviewed by your teachers and peers. So it is definitely a decision you want to make before you go into school. Really look into what a few factors that I mentioned, and if you do read a portion of our book, I do talk about deciding what this application deadline to go by. I do talk a little bit. I did talk about that, so definitely maybe read that. But I would also say I did. My peers did talk about a few things to consider while considering schools. So if there's a school that really speaks to you and you think that is a financial fit, you would fit in the student body, they have like the perfect major for you, the academic and opportunities are good, I would definitely say if you think that school is good for you and that you are a good fit for that school, definitely by all means ED or EA. Just make sure that you are aware that if you do apply ED, you can apply it to the schools. Make sure that if you're on the restrictive early action, you do just apply to one school, and that, if you just apply early action, you can apply to several schools. So definitely make sure that you are aware of these opportunities that you have. But I would say, if specifically as for ED, if you are even a little wavering about going here, don't ED, because it is really hard to get out of that contract. Just if you can't prove that you can't go there, for example, the only reason you would able to break that contract is if like their financial aid was just absolutely horrible and you'd have to go into student debt to go to that institution. That's the only way you can really get out of it, right? So if you end up, let's say you get into Penn, but then you're like, you know what, I got into Penn, but I actually want to go to Harvard or something, you can't really get out of that anymore. It's not an option you really have. So if you think you just want to know your options later on the road, don't do it ED. But I would definitely say that, for example, if you want to REA to Princeton or Stanford, definitely go for it, because the risks aren't that high. And relatively, you'll have a smaller pool to compete against. So if there's an REA school that you're really interested in, definitely go for it. It's not something that you're tied to, but if you're ED, just really, really make sure that it's something you want to do. But it does have a lot of benefits. The competition is a lot smaller. It's only maybe about 20% of the regular applicants. So it is definitely something that I took advantage of, because I felt that my application would have maybe gotten a little bit lost amongst regular decision. So definitely consider many factors into it, and just make sure you stay on top of your stuff just early on, and make decision about what if you're going to apply early to any schools right now, and don't leave that decision for later, because you just want to make sure that the adults that are going to be helping you know the deadlines that they're supposed to be looking at, and at the schools that they're supposed to be targeting. Because I do know that my teachers asked me for what schools I was applying to, for example, ED, so they could kind of target their recommendation around those schools. So definitely be very certain about what you want to do before you go into your school year.
Yeah, so I applied. Oh, you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Santi.
Okay. I applied to Stanford REA, Restrictive Early Action. And then later I applied to MIT and Harvard. And I'd say that the only difference is that you have to get your stuff, like your materials, all in order before before the due date. I didn't really experience any major like differences between the individual application processes. But I can say, like, if you do apply REA and you get accepted REA, it really pays off, I guess, because then you don't have to like worry about having any safeties or like matches, and you could just focus on your reaches, mainly because like you already have a backup plan. So that's like one of the major benefits. And like, don't think don't apply to REA if you think that the only reason you're applying is because you have a better chance. Because the truth of the matter is, like, even though the acceptance rates may be like higher than the regular decision round, it really is the same competition. It just means that, like, by applying to REA, you're just showing a specific interest in that college, and that's a factor that's like provided in your admissions officer's like decision. So like by applying to REA or to ED, you're just showing an interest in that specific school. So that's really the only benefit that you get. You don't have a higher chance of getting accepted. It's just like my counselor told me that the only reason restrictive early actions acceptance rates are so high, or like higher than the regular decision, is because a lot of students that are like considered smarter or like on top of their stuff apply there. So like it makes sense that colleges want more of those students, because those are like the students that are on top of their stuff, like shit. But yeah, so that's all I have to say.
I think just to kind of cap off, I'd put in a little tip that there are some schools that only give scholarships, not necessarily when you apply EA, but like, for example, USC, you have to turn in your application by a certain deadline, almost as if you were applying early action, but it's really just regular decision, just you have to turn it in early if you want to qualify for scholarship. Another example is like Vanderbilt. So definitely the schools that you want to apply to, look into them, make sure that if they give merit scholarships, that they don't have any requirements that you have to turn in your application by a certain point. As for EA and ED, I would recommend personally REA or EA over ED, just because looking back, I think like I'm really happy I'm going to Yale and not to Columbia, not to like throw any like shade on Columbia, but like, you know, I would have never known that I had gotten into like Yale or Harvard if I had gotten into Columbia, which, like, I don't know, just for me, I would have liked to have known everything. So I think if I redid everything over again, I would have chosen to do REA. But I mean, I think that's definitely like a personal decision for you to make. If you really love like one particular school, like, go for it, you know?
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I want to thank all our panelists today. You guys definitely provided amazing insight for us. We do have an upcoming event on August 20th with the Citibank Chief Economist, Catherine Mann, at 3:30. But right now, I'm going to send a form in the chat, and it is a post-event form. If you guys could fill that out for us, that would be great. to all the members. And then I will also be sending that via email along with the link to the book if you guys are interested in purchasing it. But thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you guys all for attending this event. That is the end of our event. See you guys.
Thank you for coming.